Alright guys, welcome to the channel, or welcome back to the channel Living in Oregon. In this video, we're going to talk about the personality of Portland. So the personality specifically of people who live in Portland. So we talk a lot about what it's like living in Portland, living in the metro area, specific neighborhoods or suburbs. In this video, we're going to approach this a little bit differently and talk more about what the people in Portland are like. So we're going to talk about it in this video. All that starts now. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul Clem with the Home Team Brokers coming to you from Portland, Oregon. In this video, we're going to talk about the personality of people who live in Portland generally. So there's obviously going to be a really big range. There's going to be a lot of nuances and differences based on where you live too. So if you live downtown, close to the city, if you live in some of the more urban residential areas, some of the really cool Portland neighborhoods, if you live in the suburbs, if you live in the outskirts, more kind of out in the country, obviously the lifestyle and some of the personalities, just the general way of life and disposition is going to be a little bit different, right? So there is a pretty big range, just like anywhere else. You can't just ascribe one specific personality to everybody that lives in Portland. Now, if this is your first time to the channel or you've been here and you haven't already and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. Okay, so does Portland have a personality? I've lived here my whole life. You know, I'd like to think I have a pretty good beat on what just the general kind of culture and character and makeup of Portland is and how that translates to people's personalities, people's attitudes, how people live day to day. Again, you know, hate to generalize, but I have some research data to actually back it up. We're going to talk a little bit more about, again, some of the stereotypes, but also really ultimately what's pretty true about those stereotypes. And if you are thinking about moving to Portland, if you are relocating to the Portland metro area for work, whatever it may be, you got to give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can talk more about your move, put together a game plan for you, so when the time comes, we can really hit the ground running. But again, there's certainly some stereotypes about Portland, maybe the Pacific Northwest. I think a lot of similarities with Seattle and Portland culturally, so some of that extends up to Seattle as well. But, you know, regionally and across the US, there are for sure regional stereotypes, right? So you have the West Coast being a little more relaxed, a little more creative. You have like the Midwest being very friendly and inviting. You have the East Coast that's typically characterized as maybe a little more temperamental, a little more fast-paced. I mean, Southern hospitality, right? So there's a lot of these stereotypes that, again, you know, probably do have some truth to them, and I do hate to generalize, but when I saw this article, you know, it really looked like a pretty good guide for, you know, getting a feel for what the people of Portland are typically going to be like. Okay, so this article citing specific research actually from a researcher or professor in the UK, so not actually in the US, but still pulled a ton of people around the US and ultimately looked at 5 primary personality traits that lend some insight into, again, somebody's behavior, how they act, their attitude about things, and that's openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, and extroversion. Now, obviously, this isn't taking into account more nuanced kind of cultural items, you know, like we've done videos on, like this one right here, talking about how cool Portland is because, you know, we rank super high in vegan restaurants and like bookstores and thrift stores and things, record stores, you know, things like that, you know, the hipster culture. So this is just more, again, kind of generally what the people of Portland are like. So we rank last in extroversion. Not an enormous surprise, but of 53 major cities across the United States, being last in extroversion, I mean, that really paints a picture in terms of what you're going to get from most people throughout the Portland metro area. Again, not going to be everybody. Again, there's going to be a really big range here, but really what that's showing you is that people in Portland just aren't as outgoing, you know, aren't as enthusiastic, aren't as sociable as really anywhere else in the United States, in this case, when you look at this particular category. Now, not a surprise, you don't run into a ton of people day to day that are super extroverted and in your face. You know, I think that a lot of people in Portland do enjoy social activities, restaurants, bars, things like that, coffee shops, and outdoors too, getting out and enjoying nature with people. These are really popular things to do living in Portland and living in Oregon. So there's certainly components of the social life here that a lot of people really engage in, and really kind of a big part of Portland culture overall. But again, people just aren't as outgoing and as extroverted. That's certainly not a surprise. I think generally, if you look at people who are more extroverted, you're looking at people who are probably seeking out places like San Francisco and LA and maybe Austin, Texas, and maybe Scottsdale, Miami, New York, areas where, again, it's just more bustling, there's more things going on, people are more go and fast paced, and that's just not going to be the case in Portland by and large. Now, the biggest culprit there, the biggest thing to point to, is something we talk about a lot, and not to beat a dead horse, but it's the weather, right? So we get a lot of gray, overcast days. It doesn't get super cold like it does in some parts of the country, but we have a good half of the year where going outside, doing things outside, in particular social activities, going to the park, barbecues, it's not as possible, or not as enjoyable, at least. So, that is something that you could easily point to. Is that the primary reason? I'm not so convinced, because really through October, you're going to be able to get out and do things. It's not inconvenient to maybe throw a coat on and still go out and meet people and be social. And so I think when you look at the social aspect of things, maybe there's something there, but not being as outgoing, not being as enthusiastic, I don't know if it's just the weather that contributes to that, and I don't know, maybe there's just something in the water. Portland, one of the few places where we don't have fluoride in our water, so maybe it's something that's not in the water. I'm not sure, but if you're moving to Portland, and if you're a super outgoing person, that really kind of gets energized off social interactions and things like that, that will be a little bit harder to come by, maybe a lot harder to come by living in Portland. So Portland ranked 33rd out of 53 cities on agreeableness. So this is going to be somebody who rates high with agreeableness is going to be really trusting, really cooperative, things like that. I would think, especially based on the extroversion piece, that Portland would be a little bit lower. We're really kind of middle of the pack. So you find that people are, not overly disagreeable or overly agreeable. You'll find a healthy level probably of skepticism for sure, but generally people cooperate, trust each other, maybe until you give them a reason not to. I would think, maybe we could be a little bit lower because I do think that there is a healthy level of skepticism. I think that, we're not super extroverted, outgoing people in general. So just that kind of cooperative nature of feeding off each other, we're not rating as high, but agreeableness, middle of the pack. We're ranked 32nd in conscientiousness. So this would be like, obeying rules, following orders, kind of conforming to norms, things like that. I would think Portland would be a lot lower on this as well, being kind of the keep Portland weird. Obviously some social unrest, that's made national headlines over the years. A lot of protesting. I mean, that is a very typical thing that you see in Portland, and something that over my whole life over the years, you all see all kinds of demonstrations, mostly peaceful, but still all kinds of demonstrations out in the street, downtown, people, protesting something or raising awareness for something, but, maybe kind of pushing back on the status quo or specific norms. So we're, again, about middle of the pack in conscientiousness, so rule following, things like that. I would have expected to be a little bit lower. So if you're moving to Portland, I think that, again, you'll find a pretty healthy balance of, maybe bending the rules when and where you can, but also for the most part, just kind of falling in line and pushing the boundaries too much. Okay, Portland also ranked 29th in neuroticism. So somebody who's highly neurotic is basically emotionally unstable. Somebody who is not neurotic at all, more kind of relaxed, very emotionally stable. Portland ranked 29th out of 53 cities, so we were right in the middle. Now, I would expect this one to be a little bit higher, just given kind of the how eclectic Portland is. We'll talk more about that. But also, when we look at things like the weather and not being very extroverted, I mean, seasonal affective disorder, I would imagine that mental health issues are maybe a little bit higher in a climate like this. I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about seasonal affective disorder in climates like where we live. So, again, not to beat a dead horse, tying things back to the weather, but ranking right there middle of the pack in neuroticism, I would expect being a little bit higher on that list in terms of, maybe a higher percentage of people who at least claim to not be as emotionally stable, or have a short fuse, or whatever it may be. Obviously, it's a very broad category, but yeah, right there, middle of the pack with neuroticism as well. And so with those three categories, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism, again, we're right there, middle of the pack. So basically, as it pertains to those categories, really just kind of normal folks living in Portland and in the Portland area, but that can be interpreted in different ways. I mean, your perspective is going to be a lot different depending on where you're coming from. So if you're coming from a place that is very, very conscientious, where like rule following and kind of following orders and following the typical norms, whatever it may be, if that's really, really high, being a little bit middle of the pack in Portland, it could feel like we've swung more, or we swing more in that direction, as far as being, not as conscientious, for example. Same with agreeableness and neuroticism. So it's all kind of relative to where you're coming from and what you're used to. Okay, so where did Portland rank the highest? Openness. So Portland was ranked 16th out of 53 cities in terms of openness. So these are people who are more open, typically are going to be more creative, more open-minded, open to new experiences, celebrate cultural diversity, things like that. So that's definitely not a surprise. Being really low on extroversion, really high on openness, neither of those are a surprise. This is something when you look at like the Keep Portland Weird tagline or slogan for the city. I mean, this encompasses that perfectly. Portland has a vibrant arts culture, music scene, again, really cool restaurants, not just good restaurants, but cool restaurant experiences, coffee shops. The brewery, the craft brewing industry, again, also provides a really, really cool experience, in terms of the dining and beer tasting experience, wine, again, coffee, all our bookstores. And then also some of kind of the more hipster culture categories like vegan restaurants, record stores, vintage clothing stores, things like that. So, Portland ranking this high in openness, again, really not a surprise at all. And this is a category that has opened up quite a bit in recent decades, as Portland shifts from less of a blue collar town and shifts more into a white collar, eclectic, artsy type town. That category has certainly changed. All right, so the researcher responsible for these findings actually made his best attempt at defining a typical Portlander. And his definition is as follows: kind of reserved, keeps to themselves, does their own thing, but quite open and artsy and curious, doesn't blindly accept social norms or conventions, and isn't necessarily outwardly friendly, but at the same time isn't overtly unfriendly. So maybe a bit more private and keeping their opinions to themselves. And that last bit of that definition is a little bit of a contrast from, again, some of the stuff maybe you've seen in the news about Portland in recent years, but also really this decades-long history in Portland of social activism and protesting and demonstrating in the streets and things like that. Obviously, that's not keeping your opinion to yourself. But I do think that although you do see these grand displays, day to day in your dealings with people aren't going to be trying to force their opinion on you. I mean, most of us are more introverted instead of extroverted, where we ranked lowest or last in the country. So we're not just going to be going up to people or talking to acquaintances and saying, hey, here's my opinion on this. Here's why you should maybe agree with me, whatever it may be. So some contradictions there maybe, but I think that is probably a pretty good summary overall. There was also this biological anthropologist from Rutgers University who studied 39,000 Oregonians, primarily people in Portland, and found that our typical personality traits are linked to a quote-unquote high estrogen brain system. All right, I'll just read what she said here. They're empathetic and they want to help people. It's also linked with being a Democrat, says Fisher. Think socially sensitive types who are able to read posture and tone of voice with a bent toward professions in public service or environmental justice. Folks in Portland have what she calls the high estrogen brain. Now, this is somebody from Rutgers over in New Jersey, so the interpretation of what the responses were, I don't even know what the questions that were asked were for her to determine that. I mean, that seems more like a kind of stereotype of somebody in Portland if you are looking at Portland from afar. So her explanation or definition of a typical Portlander is probably more of just one singular lane, where Portland has, you know, many personality types, and again, a much bigger range, where I think this researcher who did the study that we're citing for this video had, I think, nailed it a little bit better. So I'll read it again. Kind of reserved, keeps to themselves, does their own thing, but quite open and artsy and curious, doesn't blindly accept social norms and conventions, and isn't necessarily outwardly friendly, but at the same time isn't overtly unfriendly. So maybe a bit more private and keeping their opinions to themselves. All right, so just a little bit of fun here. Again, something a little bit different, doing a video talking about the personality traits of people who live in Portland. I think something that's super relevant, though, for somebody who, again, is moving into Portland from a different area, maybe from a really, really different culture. I think having an expectation of knowing what you're getting into, again, although stereotypes and generalizations, you know, aren't completely true, hopefully this was helpful in just gaining a little bit of insight in terms of what people in Portland are like. So if you are thinking about moving to Portland and you want to talk more about the culture, the people here, or if you want to talk more about what we specialize in, which is helping people relocate to the Portland metro area, identify areas, buy a home, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video and schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can start putting together a game plan for you. If this video was helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.